let me just say thank you for inviting me to the space. I'm happy to be here. It's very exciting to see so many enthusiastic folks um, ready to engage with these conversations. Let me see what I got. Today, well, the folks asked me to share a little bit about the work that I do in community. I want to just, before I even get into my remarks, just give you a little bit of a background about me and myself and my work. It's a very interesting space to be in tonight because I've been doing a lot of work around racial equity in Black and Brown communities. And this is a pretty white audience. I just want to just acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of white folks in the room, right? Okay. And then Arlington is a pretty white county, right? It's predominantly white. There's like, what, 10% Black folks in Arlington, Virginia. And like, according to the census data that I was pulling up earlier today, how ironic that the largest concentration of poverty is in the African-American community in Arlington, Virginia, right? Which I just think is just amazing and helps me kind of land into why or how do we start doing racial equity work explicitly in our urban ag envisionings, right? Speaking specifically to the Friends of Urban Ag in Arlington, how do we engage in that work? So just to start, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, which is of course the capital of Virginia. We live in Virginia, which to just make it plain, this is kind of ground zero for racial inequity in this country, right? It's in Virginia where we have the initial dispossession of indigenous people, right? Virginia is the first colony, right? And then it's also where the first 20 and something odd Africans are brought into Fort Comfort, right? And sold as chattel, right? So this is where it all kind of like starts for this American experiment, right? For this great democracy that we call the United States. This is where things went really well for if you had a lot less melanin, and went really bad for you if you had more. Okay. I'm in what used to be the capital of the Confederacy, Richmond, Virginia, where the Confederate, the last battle for the Confederacy was fought, where Black soldiers basically were the ones that marched into Richmond and ended the Civil War. But I grew up on the south side of Richmond, Virginia, which, if anyone knows about the New Deal, like many other major metropolitan cities, it was the south side of Richmond and the east end of Richmond that were areas that were denied access to financing and mortgages on the basis of race. You know, this happened everywhere across the country, right? So just, continuing the exclusion and marginalization that this nation was founded on. I grew up in neighborhoods that were excluded from that funding and that financing. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that I found myself in an area that was being called a food desert, right? Or area that didn't have access to a grocery store. I could walk from my house about 5 miles to get to a grocery store, but there's another part of my city that's in the more affluent, predominantly white area in the west end of Richmond, Virginia, where I could have parked my car on one block and walked to 4 different grocery stores on each of the corners, right? And I'm explaining that just to kind of like give you context of my remarks tonight, and just, hopefully inspire the Friends of Urban Ag in Arlington to begin to think about why, as an organization, their leadership and those that are in support are predominantly white, and the food is going to the folks that are most poor and the most impacted are predominantly black, right? That's a problem, I feel. And I think there's something that we need to change. And it's not just, you know, endemic in this organization. It's all across the country where we have well-meaning folks who aspire to, be of service and benevolence unto others. But there's some systemic issues that we haven't unpacked and we haven't dealt with that will allow us to get to the root causes of why these inequities exist in the first place. But before we get into all that, tonight I just kind of like put together some slides just to talk about why this stuff is important, or how do we get to a place where we're ready to even begin to have a conversation about how we do this work around racial equity. So first, before I begin, I just want to throw this slide up, right? We all like to say we live in a land of equality, right? But do we live in a land of equity is the question that I want to pose to folks. So the top of the slide is great because it shows that equality looks like everybody gets a bike, right? So you might be in a wheelchair, you get the same bike as the person that has super long back. Apparently his back is too long and for his legs is too long for this bike. Or you're too short for the bike, right? You're trying to, it's all the same bike, no, irrespective of your height or ability or leg length, you all get the same bike. That's equality. But what is equity? Let me look at the bottom of the slide, the bottom image. Bottom image is a lot more, it makes a lot more sense, right? Like, yeah, everybody gets a bike, but I need a specific type of bike based off of my ability, right? I need a specific type of bike based off of my height. I need a specific type of bike based off of my leg length, right? So if we can transpose these ideas or this idea into the space of race and class and gender in our world and our social interactions, then we can start to think about, okay, well, why is racial equity important in terms of this work? Like I found out earlier today, that Arlington has only got like 10% Black folks. It's like, well, that's a really interesting stat, but being that they're 10% of the population, is fascinating that they will be the highest in poverty in Arlington, right? So there appears to be a little bit of a different need for the communities of color in Arlington than the rest of the folks that are in Arlington County. So when we start to do equity work, that's when we start to identify what are the specific social conditions and realities that communities face that either impede their ability to arrive at self-determination or make it more conducive to them being able to arrive at solutions for their own betterment and empowerment. And I think for this work around urban agriculture, it's really super important for us to be thinking about not how we give away more food. And I don't, this is my philosophical ethos around this work of urban ag. The Bible tells us that you could teach a man to fish, right? You could give a man to fish or you could teach a man to fish. And for a lot of us that live inside of this urban food access space, we seem to really love giving people fish. Which is a challenge because we know how hard it is to consistently, i.e., find the volunteers to continuously grow food to give to people, right? People might do it for a season. They might get hype and say, I'm going to come out this weekend and come help you plant the tomatoes and plant the broccoli or whatever, but they might not be back the next week, right? Or the week after that. So that tends to create, an inconsistency of how much produce you could give away. But what if we flip that on its head? What does it look like for us to train people in community to build their capacity So they're not waiting for you to show up to drop off a basket of groceries. They have their own farms in their own communities, and they're growing their food for themselves without need of you coming in to drop a speck of anything off. That's a more humanizing reality that I feel like we all need to be embracing. So, how do we get to this space? How do we help you all get to that space? This is important to recognize that not being racist isn't enough. I bet if I ask everybody in this room, are you racist? Everybody in the room be like, no, I'm not racist. Hell no. No. It's those guys over there that are doing the racist things. They're the ones that are supporting, the policies that are causing problems for people of color. They're the ones over there, not me. It's somebody else. And I like to say that not being racist is insufficient, right? It's cool to be able to be in a room and talk about how you heard this horrible story from your neighbor, or you got this cousin that's just so bigoted and you just don't know how they still have these ideas. Like, that's all an amazing conversation that I've heard time and time again. But I like to think that there's another level of being, and that's being anti-racist, right? So when you hear that cousin or that coworker say that bigoted thing, right? What do you do about it? You just kind of like, I'm going to disassociate myself, right? And it's fine. It's okay to feel discomforted. You know what I mean? When you hear folks say things that are discriminatory or racially insensitive, but I think it's also another thing to think about, there being policies that run concomitant to bigoted ideas, right? I think it's important to say, it's important for me to say that I find that some of the folks that say they're not racist often have the most exclusive organizations. It's fascinating. It's like everybody in the room is not racist, but there are no Black and brown people in this room. Like, I just don't understand how that world coexists, right? If you're not racist, how come there's nobody of color in equal proportions in the leadership of the organization, right? I mean, this is not saying that you're, ready to go ride with the tiki torch at the Charlottesville rally, right? But you might still got some work to do, my good friend, right? You know what I mean? Like, who is your when you got married? Did you have any Black people at your wedding, right? Is that how much of a Black friend? How many Black friends do you really have? Are they invited to the family reunion? You know what I mean? It's usually not the case when folks say that type of stuff. So the first thing is thinking, okay, well, everybody's racist. We live in a society that's created these ideas that Black and brown people are at the bottom of a hierarchy of human value that has been manifest in the laws and historical patterns of this country across, since it was founded. How can you not be racist? That's the question you should ask yourself. Like, how can I not be racist? There's no way. I saw Cowboys and Indians when I grew up. I was rooting for the Cowboys when I should have been rooting for the Indians, right? So these are the nuances of the thing. But if we can get past the idea of thinking about there's a binary of me being a good person because I'm not racist, and there's those folks over there, they're the bad people because they are racist, and start to do some deep diving internally and think about what racist ideas, what behaviors we're bringing to this space, what ideas we have in detox from, then we can start to work towards racial equity in our community. Once you get to that point and you're on that journey, recognize that communities of color need allies that are anti-racist, that are actively detoxing from these ideas, but that are also aware of their privilege, right? There are certain benefits that come from being white in this country. The number one, access to wealth and capital. In Arlington, Virginia, just to go back to the stats, it's only 10% Black people there, and they make up 13% of the poverty. So the question that you must ask yourself is, if the circle of poverty is concentrated in the Black community in Arlington, then who's got the wealth, and where are those circles of relationships, and who has access to them more? And if we can think about anti-racism as a way of redistributing power into communities, then we can imagine that our action of just, I'm not racist, once we take it up a level, say, hey, look, I'm trying to dismantle these systems that are perpetuating concentrated poverty in these communities that manifest in folks not having access to healthy food, then maybe we can work with the community members in these areas, because I'm positive that not only is the poverty concentrated in certain areas in Arlington, but that there are also concentrated by way of racial identity, right? So how do we work with those communities explicitly to get them access to the knowledge, skills, training, and capital that they need in order to not need anybody to drop any food off on them, that they can grow their own food on their own terms? And then also like this idea of intersectionality. And I'm gonna bring this home in a few seconds. So, that there's many different types of there's the idea of me being, I'm a Black man, right? There are Black women, right? I am from a poor community, right? My family didn't have money. My mother, was a graduate, was a dropout, right? But I, by virtue of my wherewithal, went to college, and now I'm, moderately middle class, right? But there's different identities in that space. One, I'm a man. Two, I'm Black, and then I'm moderately middle class. But there's other Black people that are, homosexual, transgender, that are poor. They might be Muslim, Christian, African traditionalists, and in their identity. They might not be Christian. They might be Christian. But these intersections of identity, right, are important. And there's a space where sometimes when we're in these organizations, it's like we want a certain type of minority, not necessarily, we don't want anybody that's too radical looking, or they're Black and Muslim. I don't know, it might not be a good idea. They're transgender and Black. Whew, that's a lot for our organization to handle. And they're not Christian. How are we going to deal with that? How is that going to look? How are they going to fit into the puzzle? Like, the idea of detoxing from not being racist is going to require us to also be inclusive in terms of our definition of what Blackness is, or what our definition of other communities are, right? It's moving beyond these, okay, well, I got one Black person and that's good. No, like, we need a full representation of what's going on in the community, the different types of marginalizations that exist, okay? And then the third thing is, like, often when we talk about racial equity, people get stuck. They say, oh man, it's enough. We talk about interpersonal racism, right? Somebody calls somebody an N-word, somebody got discriminated against, or we walk past the Black person that was the labor, or the janitor, or the sanitation worker, and we were like, we didn't speak to that guy, but I'm going to speak to the person that's in the suit. That's the guy that I'm talking to. But then there's another level of racism that's more de jure. Like, back in the day, we know segregation is over technically, but today we know our schools are just as segregated as they were during Brown versus the Board of Education. We know our neighborhoods are just as segregated as they were prior to the Fair Housing Act, right? But we also know that there's impacts that have lived on as a result of redlining and urban renewal in Black communities, right? That the same maps that I can show, this is a map of Richmond, Virginia from 1954, I think. This is the Homeowners Loan Corporation. This is the map of redlining in my city. I'm sure that there's one of Arlington. But in this map, It shows the east end of the city, the north side and the south side. Those are the red areas. Those are the areas where the homeowners loan or the Federal Housing Administration denied Black people for loans. But then I got little dots on here, right? So these little dots are from 2016. And these are all the vacant, dilapidated, and abandoned properties, according to the city. And you can see their concentration are in the same areas that were redlined back in the 50s. So that we're living with these scars of institutional racism, systemic racism from the 1950s, even to today. The same maps will show you where the lack of healthy food is. To show you who doesn't have access to a park. They'll show you who has higher heat indexes in the summer. So it's about how do we undo these things and understand that racism doesn't stay the same, it evolves. And that what we saw back in the 50s might not be applicable today, but we still dealing with the results. And then number 5, it's important for all of us to be courageous and brave, but it's mostly important for white folks to feel like, hey, it's okay to do this work and not know, how it's gonna go. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to say that you got to have all the answers, but it's more important for you to understand that, hey, look, if you feel like it's important to know that you can make a difference. Like a lot of times I run into folks that say, hey, this is such a huge problem. There's nothing I can do about it. Yes, it is. You as an individual do have power, right? You have influence. You have the capacity to organize. You got people at the table as a board of a nonprofit organization that's raising money to do amazing work. How many of y'all on the board? It's like what, 6, 8 of y'all? So one person connected to another person, then another person showed up, and then all of a sudden you had 6, 8 people and you started a nonprofit. So if you could recognize that one person or 2 people had an idea that you can make a difference. And I know it's scary, because a lot of us, we watch, I pay attention. I'm a Black person, I see it. I know that there's racist folks in your family, there's racist people on your job and in your social circles, and you like, I don't want to be the person to get outcasted by them. You know what I mean? They might not be ultra racist, but they got some ideas, and I don't, that's my family though. I ain't trying to be, pushed out from my family. But, we don't want you to be pushed out from your family either, but we want you to help your family evolve, right? And, or you might feel guilty by all this stuff. Like, yeah, maybe your family had slaves, maybe the plantation that your family owned is still in your family's land, in your family's name, and it's been passed down generation to generation. Or maybe you got, inheritance from generations of families that played a role in the slave trade, or were discriminatory in their policies, or what I mean. They were not the best character, in the historical arc of this country, right? You ain't really proud of them, but and you feel guilty about that, and you want to do something about it, but you're stuck in the guilt place. And it's okay to feel ashamed about that stuff, because we're looking at it in hindsight, and 2020 is always better. But you got better vision than 2020. But this is the deal: you can't stay stuck in your guilt. You got to figure out how to transform that shame into productive activity that again redistributes wealth, capital, resources to the communities that were exploited in generations past and are continued to be exploited even into this day. But you got to start with you, baby. You can't do nothing. What Michael Jackson say? I'm starting with the man in the mirror, right? I'm willing to make a change, right? So it's all about you. Like, what are you bringing to the space? And this is probably the most important thing that I had to say today. That each one of us, we have the capacity to make change in our community, but we can't do nothing until we change ourselves, right? So how are we showing up authentically? How are we showing up with honesty, transparency? How are we building trust with others, right? Those are some of the key ideas, right? How are we honoring generations to come? How are we using the most, what Jesus teach us? The most important commandment, what he say? He said, love others as you do yourself. Treat others how you would treat yourself, right? So if you, will want, somebody to teach you how to grow vegetables versus coming to drop vegetables off on you every week, then you should be teaching people how to grow their own vegetables instead of coming to drop vegetables off. I mean, this is a fascinating kind of phenomenon. I see it all across the country, like, that there's a desire to help, right? But how would you want to be helped, right? If you were in a position of poverty or extreme need, would you want to be in a position where you were dependent on somebody else coming into your neighborhood every week to make sure you had the things that you need? Or would you want your situation to grow so you were in control of how, your world looked? Would you want somebody to make those decisions for you? Or would you want to have the power to transform the community, your situation on your own terms? These are the type of questions we got to ask ourselves as we do this work, as we brace ourselves for looking at this stuff from a racial equity lens. And then here, this is the thing, and I'm a land this plane right here. You got to become an ally. You got to start where you're at, right? So if your work is urban ag, let's learn as much as you can about the historical inequities that have occurred in agriculture, right? If your work is philanthropy, right? Learn everything you can learn about the historical inequities that have arisen in the world of philanthropy, right? If you're a city government, if you're a city planner, learn how the built environment has been designed to exclude people on the basis of their ability, on the basis of race, on the basis of gender and class. Like how does your transportation run, right? You know what I mean? Whose community was redlined? How hot is it in the community? Like, look at it from a lens of race. Start where your work is and radiate outward. And this is the most important piece of all of this. Remember that all of these spaces intersect, okay? Philanthropy and urban ag work in synchronicity. So who's getting funded, right? When we look at those guide star profiles in our city, we find out the nonprofits in our city. Let's look at the 990s. Who's getting what? When we look at the nonprofit that's led by the organization of color, and we compare it to the white-led organization that's doing the same work as that Black organization, who's getting the most money? Huh? And when we get the answers to those questions, we got to be willing to say, okay, well, how do we get this right? How do we make it so that it's equitable, where everybody's getting what they need, right? And it's not just one group taking all of the resources and leaving everybody else out in the dust to starve and scramble and do something for free to try to figure out how to make the impact that they're trying to make in community. So, the number 8, the last thing is, after you've done that work, after you've done that self-analysis on a personal level and on an organizational level, then you can start to think about, okay, well, let's adopt a racial equity practice. What is our work going to look like moving forward? How are we going to diversify our board, right? How are we going to develop collaborations with organizations of color, right? How are we going to start to develop a shared vision in a collaborative form with other nonprofits in our region and in our area to ensure that the work that we're doing is building community capacity and lifting the community out of a dependency model? How do we get to radical solutions that make our organizations obsolete? Like, what are we doing to make sure that the communities that we're serving don't need us, right? And that's a hard question to ask for folks that are in this nonprofit space, but I ask you, if the work that you're doing is not being done so that you're obsolete, what are you really doing? Right? What are you really doing? What are you really doing? And if you can sit there and answer that question and not feel ashamed for how your outcomes are basically perpetuating your existence, you gotta do some deeper analysis as to why you're in this work. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to achieve and cultivate justice so that communities can have the thriving reality that they deserve. Not what we think they deserve. They need to have what they feel like they need and what they want, not just what we feel like we got time to volunteer and give them. So I'm gonna close with that and say, I implore all organizations across, the gambit of gender, race, class, to start to look at the work that they're doing through a racial equity lens. How do we meet communities where they are and build their capacity so that they don't need us at all? What is it that we're going to have to do internally in order to be able to show up in that work authentically, honestly, and courageously? What is it going to take? I hope to see y'all again, and I look forward to doing some more training with you all. Perhaps we can even dig into how we can work with your organization to guide you on some sort of a strategy to get to that place. But I appreciate you all giving me the opportunity to share, and I hope any of my remarks tonight were able to hit someone close to home and make us think about what we're doing and how we're advancing racial justice in our community. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Awesome stuff. Duran,